Hi, this is Phillip Mason with Incredible Fathers. I'm so glad that you've joined us here today. Glad to have you along with this adventure as we learn how to become better fathers. So my friend, I just wanted to share with you just a few insights that I had from my morning study about being a parent, being a father. And one of the things that's really kind of stood out to me as I was studying this morning is that as parents, we have a responsibility to teach, and children will automatically learn. That's just what they do. They're always learning. You can't shut that off. Sometimes we can help facilitate learning and encourage them along in the right direction, which is always our goal. But they're going to learn whether or not we teach them or not. So it's our responsibility to jump in and teach them. One of the things I find really interesting, a lot of the conventional parenting wisdom that's out there suggests that we should attach consequences to a child's behavior. So if a child misbehaves, we might add some consequences on top of that. So we might say, well, you said a bad word to your brother. You now need to sweep the kitchen and the nook, and that has to be all done here within 15 minutes, and attach consequences to that to teach them what correct behavior is. The reality is that most children, they're making most of their decisions based off emotion and instinct. So as parents, a better approach is to teach them, always be teaching them early and often. So teaching them the right way to be and basing our teachings off of principles and values and not on what mom and dad dictate. So what happens a lot of times is if we naturally just throw on consequences on our children to correct their behavior, what they learn from that is that mom and dad are a dictator. That's eventually what they learn. Now, there can be a very narrow set of parameters in which a parent could issue consequences for certain decisions, and it can be highly effective, especially if the child has what I call godly sorrow for their mistakes, or they feel remorse of conscience for that. That could be effective. But in most situations, children they're making split-second decisions based off of instinct and emotion, and there already are natural consequences in the world around them. God's already placed a lot of natural consequences on this earth. And so as parents, really our focus should be teaching our children to be obedient to God and His law. And when they're obedient to God and His law, they naturally see those consequences in their life, regardless of what mom and dad do. And so when we add additional consequences onto our children that go above and beyond what God's already put in place, that can add a heavy weight on our children, and they can become resentful. They may become more frustrated or bitter. And a lot of times that's directed towards us as parents, which makes us more frustrated as parents, and we put more consequences on them to show them who's boss. And that's really not the right way to do things. The right way to do things is to have them know that God is perfect, God is loving, and He wants the very best for them, and He's a parent too, and He wants them to grow and develop just like we want our children to grow and develop. And so when we take that approach, it takes the pressure off of us as parents, and also takes the pressure off the child when they recognize that mom and dad are just simply trying to help them follow after Jesus Christ and Heavenly Father. And so when you do that, it just kind of opens up a whole new world that you haven't ever approached before as a parent. And some of you are wise and have been doing this all along. But if you haven't been doing this and you've been relying on tips and tricks and tactics to get your child and trying to manipulate them into doing the type of behavior that you want to see from them, that's really the wrong approach. The right approach is to just to always teach them. So for example, one of the things that we teach in our home, we're a Christian home, and of course we teach our children, to think of the question, what would Jesus do in this situation? Or how would God have you act towards your brother in this situation? So we teach them questions like that to ask. And we teach them doctrines such as we are all children of our Heavenly Father. So they realize that they have a divine parentage and that spiritually they're connected to God that way. That we're their earthly parents, but that they have a divine parentage spiritually. And so that's a very powerful doctrine. It's a very powerful principle that connects them to heaven. So for example, just this morning, my son walks out of the room that I'm in, and his brother whizzes by and does something that annoys him. And so he yells at him and calls him a name, and then he tears after him, trying to hit him. And so instead of me grabbing my son and pulling him aside and saying, that was a bad thing you did. You need to go mow the lawn, or you need to go do the laundry, or you need to, you're grounded for today. You can't leave your bedroom. Instead of doing something like that, all I did is I went to him and I made a statement, and I said, I don't think that was the right way to handle that situation. And that's all I said. And immediately it began to get him thinking about what he just did. And it was interesting that he took a moment and he started actually, I could tell, he didn't say anything, but he kind of bowed his head and there was some introspection. He was thinking about his behavior and how he had acted. Now, sometimes making a simple statement like that is all that needs to be done. Sometimes it's a question. Sometimes you ask a specific question. Going back to the, what would Jesus do? Or what was that one principle that we learned? What was it about it that was, important in this situation that we just experienced? It can be something super simple like that. So when children realize that we're not accusatory, but rather we're trying to help them learn how to handle situations in a very powerful and productive way so that they can become better adults someday. That's what we're going for. So don't supercharge your child's frustration by adding more consequences on. There's already plenty of consequences in the natural world that God's put into effect, right? God's done that very effectively. We don't have to play the role of God, so to speak. But children will learn, and they'll learn very quickly. And so if you take the pressure off yourself and the pressure off of them, they'll be very effective in learning the right way to be. And it's not necessarily about the behavior, it's about getting them to live according to true and correct principles and true and correct doctrines, true and correct values. So that's really, as our parents, that's really our focus should be at. Thank you, friend, for taking this time to visit with me. It's been a pleasure to be with you. This is Phillip Mason with Incredible Fathers, and I look forward to visiting with you in our next episode.